So let me start by getting one misconception clarified. Something that drives me absolutely crazy as a designer. The confusion between design and decoration. They're not interchangeable. Decoration is what you do to a cake. Decoration is an embellishment. It has no concern with functionality or logic. But design has a particular and intended purpose. Design is not an afterthought. Design is not even a physical entity at all. Design is a way in which to think. It's the psychology of understanding this world around us. At its core, design isn't building buildings. Design is building those memories within those buildings. It's not constructing spaces, but constructing the experiences within those spaces, around those spaces. At the end of the day, design is simply just studying the human behavior and curating a feeling around that. So all of that was just the cliff notes of 4 years of architecture school at Parsons School of Design in New York City, where they pounded and pounded into our heads that design is very much so this process and never the added last layer. So as you can imagine, a naive 17-year-old thrown into our nation's mecca of architecture, I had no idea how to interpret this. I just knew I wanted to design cool houses for my friends. But somewhere in between my all-nighters, building the Roman Colosseum at a chipboard at a 1/4-inch scale, and creating shelter from the elements out of found objects within a 1-block radius in Manhattan, I physically and emotionally learned that design is very much so a way in which to study, interpret, and even reimagine this thing we call life. So for example, here's my senior thesis at Parsons, where we were given a very large issue to solve through design: chronic homelessness in the roughest part of the United States, Skid Row. So they put us on a plane from New York City to Los Angeles, where we had to live on the streets for 3 days, studying their way of life, hearing their stories, observing their day-to-day. We then had a semester to come up with a solution through the built environment. I realized very quickly a building wasn't the answer they needed. It was their morale that needed building. So I decided to spend my last 6 months as a Parsons student inventing an entirely new way, an entirely new system of energy, currency, and a way in which to engage in the urban context. I called the project Life Cycle, emphasis on a bicycle and its circular momentum, but also on the idea of recycling energy. And I've always been a sucker for a good pun, so of course the name had to have multiple meanings: a bicycle that recycled the chronic cycle of homelessness, all puns, fully intended. But really, Life Cycle was a bike sharing system that, when ridden, would create kinetic energy and then store that energy into batteries that was then implemented back into the grid or into the greater city of Los Angeles. Every resident would have a point card that would log the amount of energy created. So the idea was to make energy the new form of currency. The more you rode, the more money you now had to buy you access to food, laundry, and other services within the confines of Skid Row. This alternative energy sparked a new energy inside all of them. The transformation was amazing. The residents finally felt like they were part of something bigger than themselves. It gave them a sense of place, a sense of collaboration, something they had never had before. So I'm still fully convinced that building a roof over their head, like my assignment originally asked for, wouldn't have given them the same sense of accomplishment. And in reality, they knew where to find shelter if that's what they really wanted. What they didn't know where to find was confidence and a community. And that's what needed to be built. So I find it kind of ironic. My senior thesis in sustainable architecture wasn't a built structure at all. Instead, I rebuilt the city and I rebuilt its people. I also find it kind of ironic that they weren't homeless all along. They were just houseless, because home is something we hold within, which is something I've carried with me as I continue to design people's homes, remembering it's something I can't build, it's only something that they can feel. So I graduated Parsons, realizing design is a hell of a lot heavier than I originally thought, but incredibly necessary in order to cut through life's complexities. So you have my permission to bang your head on the floor like I did this brick many times at my old firm, trying to make sense of all these lofty problems. Whether global warming, the economic crash, the oncoming drought disaster, I believe applying design strategies is the answer. The starchitects of the future are going to be those that can mastermind how to bridge this gap between today and tomorrow to create this culture of consciousness. But what about all of you? How do you apply design? How do we integrate design in the near and distant future? I put together this simple 3-point checklist that hopefully all of you can tuck away in your memory bank. 1, think like a leaf. Design by nature, or the scientific term, biomimicry. Literally mimic how nature designs, how it sustains itself through trial and error. When one lifespan ends, it aids to the next, and so forth, never creating any waste. The buzzword for this, cradle to cradle, which is an ongoing circle of life. However, unfortunately, up until now, we've designed cradle to grave. We create things with the one-time use. Once fulfilled, we just toss it into the trash. So how do we design chairs that don't erode in landfills, but instead break down and become another chair? Or its leather go into making a bag, and its legs into making a dresser, and so forth. As makers of the future, it's up to us to see the bigger picture. We need to be the visionaries of 25 plus years out. If we can't see the future, how are we expected to build it for everybody else? Secondly, let digital innovation enhance the physical experience, but never overpower it. Physical should always be more desirable than digital. Where we're headed, design lies at the crossroads between the visible and the invisible. The future of architecture, and the future of design at large for that matter, looks something like a swinging pendulum between the digital and physical world, where the human experience is only heightened by technological capabilities. One of my favorite examples of this is Nike. Their website is great. The user experience, simple and engaging. I almost start to cry every time I see that athlete persevere in one of their commercials. As I click through the store, I become more and more motivated to go for that run. I see the aerodynamic gear on Serena Williams, and I'm like, God, I gotta have that. Click. But the in-store experience, best in the game, in my opinion. I'm not sure how many of you have been to Nike Town in New York City, but it's a sensory overload. You walk in and you literally feel like you're Michael Jordan and can slam dunk the ball into the basketball hoop that they've intentionally placed by the register on your way out. The smells, the neon lighting. You won't see a clearance sign hanging trying to persuade you to buy one thing or the other. You just feel obligated to. You'd almost feel guilty walking out and not having a memorable takeaway. Companies like Nike excel in the marriage between digital and physical. Their brand evokes a particular emotion inside all of us. They know that. They've owned it. They've designed it. Lastly, let human behavior shape the decision making. Our bodies and our body's ergonomics is just a cheat sheet. All we have to do is study how the body moves through space and just design around that. So a product designer, intentionally mold to the form of the hand. A fashion designer, the curve in the hip and the pleat in the knee. A spatial designer, intentionally shrinking the entrance only to make the ceiling feel more grand past the threshold. All of this comes from studying how the body and the mind dance with the objects that they interact with. Whether a phone, a shoe, or a car, how does that object and the user live in a symbiosis where they almost become one? A company who I feel excels in this exponentially is one we have all gotten to know so well here in Reno, Tesla. Whether they're cars, spaceships, or battery-operated houses, they've all been disruptors in the field of advancement because they've honed in and they truly understand the human experience so profoundly. Tesla has single-handedly created an ecosystem of the future. So in closing, something Elon Musk would be the first to agree with is design takes tenacity. It takes resilience. Spoiler alert, you will fail. Failure is part of the design process. Trying and trying again is the only way we innovate. It's the only way we grow. And like my friends at Skid Row taught me, all of those failed attempts are only stepping stones towards a well-crafted life journey. Because at the end of the day, what would life be without design? A big, white, empty, boring, expected box. Without experiences, I feel life would be meaningless. So as we move forward, I challenge you. I challenge you to think a little differently, to maybe think like a designer when you're faced with your next project, whether that be at home, at work, or the in-between. And I challenge you to not just make something pretty, but to problem solve. And remember, design is not an afterthought. Design is the way in which to think. Thank you.